week 14 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units I have as sleepers this week. The first one, the Denver Broncos. So I know Denver, on paper, it's not a great matchup at all versus a tough Los Angeles Charger team that gives up the third least amount of fantasy points to DSTs on the season. But this Charger offense the last 3 weeks really hasn't been impressive. They're not putting up points on the board. And this Denver defense, believe it or not, has turned things around over the last month of the season. So the last few weeks for them, week 11 versus Minnesota, 20 points allowed, 2 sacks and INT, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 12 versus Cleveland, 12 points allowed, 4 sacks, 3 fumble recoveries. And week 13 at Houston, 22 points allowed and 5 sacks. Available in 64% of fantasy leagues. This is Denver Bronco DST. Like I said, they're getting to the quarterback. They're holding offenses down, mid-teens, low 20s. We even saw it a few weeks ago versus the Kansas City Chiefs. They held them down to 9 points in week 8. And also the Buffalo Bills in week 10. For that Bill offense in Buffalo to hold them to 22 is impressive as well. So ever since that Miami game, they got rid of some people. They changed the personnel up. And it took them weeks to get going. But now this Bronco team's getting going and making plays. So right now in a playoff atmosphere with both teams fighting for a wild card position, I think this Bronco defense as a sleeper option could put in a decent performance. The next DST I have as a sleeper is the Chicago Bears. So this Bear defense I know isn't really a good defense at all. They give up a lot of points. Teams have gone up and down the field all season versus them. But Jared Goff has turned the football over a decent amount of times over the last few weeks. And believe it or not, this Bear D has been serviceable the last 3 weeks. Week 10 versus Carolina, 13 points, 3 sacks in that one. Week 11 at Detroit, 29 points allowed, but 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. In week 12 in Minnesota, in one of the worst games you'll see all season on Monday night, 10 points allowed, 2 sacks, and 4 INTs. So going back to that week 11 game at Detroit, like I mentioned, Jared Goff's been turning the football a lot over the last 3 weeks. And they did give up 29 points, but also caused 4 turnovers and had 2 sacks. So right now in a division game, you know anything can happen and anything goes for the most part, especially in Soldier Field where this weather most likely is going to be freezing out. And that's a tough grass at this time of year in December. So right now I think the Chicago team is a sleeper option. Available in 96% of fantasy leagues. Could be surprising and have a decent performance. And the third and final defense DST I have as a sleeper this week is the Cincinnati Bengals. So this Bengal defense, I know they really haven't been that great this season. This week could be a potential shootout with them in the Indianapolis Colts. And like I said, the last few weeks we've seen nothing from this Bengal D. Week 11 in Baltimore, 34 points allowed, 3 sacks. Week 12 versus the Steelers, 16 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. And week 13 at Jacksonville, 31 points allowed and 4 sacks. So this Bengal DST available right now in 74% of fantasy leagues. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if they had a game out of nowhere where they put up decent games. I know Gardner Minshew is playing pretty good football, and this Colt team is as well 7-5 on the season. But he's due for a bad turnover type of game because he's that type of quarterback where he's a gunslinger where he can move the football down the field, but also the turnovers could be a problem as well. So if you need a defense in the deepest of leagues, I have Cincinnati as a sleeper this week. So that's a few defense DST units I have as sleepers for week 14 of the fantasy football season.